The whisper was soft, a silken thread pulled tight across the darkness of our bedroom. "Sarah, wait." I didn't move. I didn't scream, didn't shove him awake, didn't even turn on the lamp. I just lay there, the name echoing, sinking like cold metal into my chest. There are moments in life, a single syllable, a careless touch, a misplaced key, that act as the pivot point, splitting your history into before and after. That name, breathed out in the false intimacy of his sleep, was my pivot. I want you to pause for a second. Right now, as you listen to my voice, where are you? Are you driving through Houston, maybe sitting in a quiet cafe in Seattle, or winding down late at night in Miami? Tell me in the comments your city and the time you're tuning in. It helps me feel connected to you, knowing we're sharing this moment, knowing that even in these painful truths, none of us are truly alone. My name is Eleanor. For years, I genuinely believed I had the blueprint for happiness. David and I built a life that looked exactly like the glossy magazine covers. The house in the suburbs of Chicago, the stable careers, the quiet Sunday mornings. We were the couple everyone envied, the ones who seemed to glide effortlessly through life's turbulence. I trusted David implicitly. If you had asked me yesterday, I would have sworn he was incapable of dishonesty. Our foundation felt unshakable. And then there was Vivian, our neighbor, the woman who lived 2 houses down, whose garden advice I trusted more than my own mother's, the friend I shared coffee with every Thursday morning. She was part of the landscape of our perfect reality. This is what my channel is all about. Peeling back the layers of those perfect facades and sharing the stories of what happens when the foundation cracks. If you're here for raw, true stories about survival and reclamation, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like. Your support keeps these truths coming, and it helps other women realize they don't have to stay silent. Our routine was a comfort, a meticulously organized calendar of predictability. David would leave for his finance job exactly at 7:45 a.m. He'd kiss me goodbye, always 2 pecks, one on the cheek, one on the forehead. I never questioned the long hours, the sudden weekend requirements, or the quick business trips to New York that always seemed to pop up on short notice. Why would I? Trust was the foundation. It was the air we breathed. We had navigated career changes, family sickness, and financial setbacks. I genuinely believed we were too strong, too honest with each other, for something as cliché as infidelity to touch us. I saw the signs, retrospectively of course, but I always rationalized them away, stuffing them back into the box labeled paranoia or stress. The shift started subtly, like a hairline crack you only notice when the light hits it right. The phone, which used to lie face up on the kitchen counter while he scrolled through the news, was suddenly always face down, even when he went to shower. It was an instinctive, almost defensive gesture, like guarding a secret treasure. His explanations for being late shifted from traffic to vague, complicated narratives about client meetings running long, details that were too granular, too specific, as if he were trying too hard to convince me. He started taking calls in the garage, speaking in a hushed, almost annoyed tone, always claiming it was a sensitive conversation with his boss. The worst was the physical distance. The easy laughter disappeared, replaced by a nervous energy, a constant fidgeting when we sat together on the sofa to watch a movie. He would flinch if I reached for his hand. And then there was the scent. A faint, expensive jasmine perfume that wasn't mine, which I'd occasionally catch clinging to the fabric of his suit jacket when I took it to the dry cleaners. I told myself it was a colleague, maybe a client he'd hugged goodbye. I spent hours convincing myself that my signature rosewater scent was simply being overpowered by someone else's strong fragrance in the stale air of a conference room. But deep down, the feeling in my gut was a cold, constant reminder that something fundamental was broken, cemented by that whispered name in the dark. Sarah. I had spent weeks trying to ignore the whispers and the imported perfume. But that particular Tuesday, fate decided I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I was supposed to be in a mandatory all-day seminar for my consulting firm downtown, 3 hours away from our house in the suburbs. I had packed my briefcase, set my schedule, and even prepped dinner. I was halfway through the commute when a sudden blinding migraine hit me so hard I had to pull over. I realized immediately there was no way I could sit through an 8-hour presentation. I called my office, canceled everything, and started the long drive back to the quiet sanctuary I called home, completely unaware that sanctuary was about to become the epicenter of my own personal earthquake. I was just focused on finding the darkest room and a strong painkiller. I didn't even call David to tell him I was coming. Why would I? He was supposed to be at the office. I drove the SUV into the driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under the tires usually signaling peace. Today, it felt like an announcement of war. I parked, and instantly my headache intensified. Not because of the light, but because of the vehicle parked next to mine, David's dark gray sedan. He was supposed to be in the city, leading a major presentation. He hadn't called, he hadn't texted. The air in the garage felt thick and wrong. I unlocked the front door, the click of the tumbler sounding unnaturally loud in the absolute stillness of the foyer. I dropped my briefcase and purse onto the marble floor. The first thing that assaulted me wasn't the silence, but a scent. Heavy, cloying, and utterly out of place. It was jasmine and sandalwood, a signature expensive perfume that belonged to only one woman in our small universe, Monica, our neighbor, my friend, the woman I trusted. The shock didn't register as panic. It registered as a cold, paralyzing clarity. The throbbing migraine was instantly forgotten, replaced by a focused dread that settled like ice in my stomach. I didn't call out. I didn't want to break the silence. I walked toward the staircase, my worn leather work flats barely making a sound on the hardwood. Every upward step felt like an immense effort, pulling me closer to a truth I already knew, but refused to acknowledge fully. As I reached the landing, the air grew warmer, humid. I saw it. Immediately, the master bedroom door, usually kept firmly closed, was open a sliver. A narrow, blinding shaft of afternoon sunlight escaped the gap. I stopped, my hand hovering, unable to touch the pristine white paint. My breathing hitched, a dry, strangled sound that felt trapped in my chest. I pushed the door open just enough to confirm the horror, and there they were, not hiding, not hurried, but relaxed, utterly comfortable. They were tangled in the crisp white sheets of the king-sized bed David and I had picked out on our honeymoon, the duvet pushed down around their legs. David's arm was draped intimately over her shoulder, his face buried slightly in her neck. The gold band of my wedding ring, his wedding ring, gleamed under the light, resting right against Monica's pale skin. They were laughing, a low, soft, shared chuckle that was the sound of complete intimacy, tearing through the silence and shredding every memory I possessed. It wasn't just the physical betrayal. It was the casual, easy comfort they shared that demolished me. My David, the man whose loyalty I never questioned, was exchanging sweet nothings with the woman who borrowed my baking supplies and whose children played with our niece. The primal urge to scream, to shatter the room with my fury, surged, but my body overrode it. I bypassed rage and went straight to strategy. I didn't want chaos. I wanted leverage. I wanted a clean, decisive victory. I slowly, deliberately, reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my cell phone. My hand was steady. Cold, surgical precision replaced emotion. I opened the camera app, switched to video mode, and zoomed slightly. I needed to capture everything: the setting, the specific clothes discarded on the Persian rug, David's favorite tie, Monica's distinctive silver ankle bracelet, and the undeniable evidence of their relaxed state. I filmed their interaction for nearly a full minute, documenting the intimate gestures, the shared laughter, the undeniable proof that this was not a moment of weakness, but a settled routine. When I had enough, clear, undeniable, time-stamped proof, I took 2 steps back. I closed the door silently, gently. They hadn't heard me. They were too engrossed in their disgusting little world. I descended the stairs, not running, not crying, but moving with the heavy, measured pace of someone carrying a great weight. I retrieved the small key from my briefcase and went directly to the library. I pulled out the files I had prepared months ago, the moment the first unexplained weekend trip appeared on the corporate account. Those files, the detailed roadmap to divorce, now felt like a lifeline. But first, Thomas, Monica's husband. Poor, trusting Thomas, who had always been so kind. I owed him the truth. But more importantly, I needed him. His fury would be a force multiplier, ensuring that David and Monica couldn't coordinate their lies. I sat at the mahogany desk, the lingering jasmine scent in the air fueling my resolve. I pulled up Thomas's contact. I took one deep, clarifying breath, purging the last vestiges of my shock. My voice, when I spoke, was dangerously low, utterly devoid of warmth. Thomas, it's Amelia. I need you to come over right now. I just came home early and I think you need to see this. He sounded confused, his voice thick and unsuspecting. See what, Amelia? Is everything okay? No, Thomas, I confirmed, the words heavy with finality. Nothing is okay, but you need to bring your phone. Make sure it has plenty of storage for video. You are going to want to record what you find. I hung up before he could ask another question. I went back upstairs, walking past the locked door. I heard a muffled sound from inside, a new wave of laughter. I reached out and slid the metal deadbolt home. Click, click. 2 definite, final sounds. They were trapped now. I leaned against the wall, waiting for Thomas, letting the silence outside the locked door amplify the horrifying truth inside. My marriage was over, but my reign of control had just begun. I hung up before he could ask another question. I went back upstairs, walking past the locked door. I heard a muffled sound from inside, a new wave of laughter. I reached out and slid the metal deadbolt home. Click, click. 2 definite, final sounds. They were trapped now. I leaned against the wall, waiting for Thomas, letting the silence outside the locked door amplify the horrifying truth inside. My marriage was over, but my reign of control had just begun. My head throbbed, not from the betrayal. That pain was too deep for a simple ache, but from the reason I'd come home in the first place. I had left the downtown Chicago office hours earlier, completely derailed by a blinding, nauseating migraine that hit me like a physical punch. I had a crucial investor presentation scheduled for the following morning, and the files were locked on my home desktop. My intention was to grab the laptop, take 2 maximum strength pills, and spend the next 12 hours submerged in darkness. The house, usually alive with the hum of the city filtering in, was unnervingly silent. That was the first prickle of ice down my spine. Mark had texted me early that morning saying his regional sales conference in Naperville was running late, and he wouldn't be back until after 7. Yet, parked haphazardly in the driveway, visible through the kitchen window, was his black SUV. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, inhaling deeply. It was a reflex I hadn't realized I possessed until that moment. the instinctive sniffing out of trouble. And I smelled it. Not Mark's usual cedar and spice cologne, but something cheap, cloying, and intensely floral. A sickly sweet lily. Perfume that Clara, our neighbor, always wore. Clara, who babysat our dog when we traveled. Clara, whose husband Thomas I had just called. My heart didn't pound. It simply stopped, suspended in a terrible, cold vacuum. I started up the oak staircase, each step a creak against the silence, a countdown to detonation. The air grew heavier, warmer, carrying that offensive scent mixed now with the unmistakable aroma of stale intimacy. The master bedroom door, our door, was not completely closed. It was ajar, leaving a sliver of darkness framed by the hallway light. I didn't rush. Rushing would imply emotion, panic. I walked toward the open door with the slow, deliberate pace of a judge entering the courtroom. I placed my hand on the smooth, cold brass handle, took one last breath of clean hallway air, and pushed the door inward. The scene was not shocking in its details. I won't desecrate this space with specifics, but it was annihilating in its context. Mark, my husband of a decade, the man who spoke vows of forever, was tangled up with Clara in the center of our king-sized bed. Their movements stopped instantly, their faces snapping toward the doorway like startled animals caught in a spotlight. There was no lust in their eyes now, only the immediate, ugly flood of shame and terror. Clara screamed, a high, thin sound that immediately cut off. Mark tried to cover himself, a futile, grotesque gesture. For a long moment, I simply stood there, absorbing the visual evidence. The scattered clothes, the rumpled duvet, the way their bodies recoiled from each other, as if suddenly recognizing the poison they had shared. It wasn't anger I felt. It was a surgical detachment. The Mark in that bed was not the man I loved. He was a problem to be solved, a variable to be contained. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. The only sound was the click of my phone screen turning on. I pulled the device from my purse, my hand steadier than it had been all morning, and raised it to eye level. I didn't need to capture the graphic moment. I needed to capture their faces, their state of undress, and the geography of the room. I needed proof of who and where. "Mark, Clara," I said, my voice flat, almost bored. It was worse than a scream. It was indifference. "Smile for the camera." Mark launched himself off the bed, stumbling over the sheets. "Wait, Sarah, stop. It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like, Mark," I corrected him calmly, holding the phone steady as I walked slowly around the foot of the bed, capturing the whole scene, documenting the utter wreckage of my life. "You are having an affair with our neighbor, Clara, and I'm recording it." Clara was weeping now, pulling the sheet up to her chin. "Please, Sarah, don't do this." I ignored her. I finished my circuit, stopping only to take a close-up of the wedding photos on the nightstand, perfectly juxtaposed against the chaos of the bed. I clicked the video off and slipped the phone back into my pocket. "Don't worry," I said, turning my back on them. "The show is just starting." I walked out of the room, shutting the door firmly. That was the first step. The second was the deadbolt. Click, click. The sound of a jail cell closing. And then I called Thomas. Thomas, Clara's kind, unsuspecting husband, lived 3 houses down. He was probably at his dental practice in Evanston, blissfully unaware that his entire reality was about to shatter. I gave him the short, sharp version, cutting through his confusion with military precision. "Thomas, I need you to come to my house immediately," I said into the phone, leaning against the wall outside the prison of my former marriage. "Do not ask questions. Just get in your car. Your wife is here with Mark, and you are going to want to record what you find." Now, leaning here, the reality of the double lock warm beneath my fingers, I heard a new sound from inside. The laughter had stopped. It was replaced by panicked whispering and the rhythmic banging of Mark trying the doorknob, realizing he was trapped. They were arguing now, blaming each other for the discovery, for the lack of foresight. I smiled, a thin, hard line of satisfaction. Let them panic. Let the reality of their capture sink in. Thomas would be here in 30 minutes, maybe less if he broke the speed limit. When he arrived, we wouldn't need to break down the door. We would unlock it, reveal the spectacle, and gather the final, undeniable proof together. This was not a fit of rage. This was an execution plan. The first step was isolating the evidence. The second, securing an unimpeachable witness. Mark and Clara thought they were merely caught. They didn't understand they had walked into a meticulously prepared trap designed for maximum legal and social destruction. My reign of control had indeed just begun. The presentation was going well, flawless even, when the world decided to tilt. Not metaphorically, but literally. A sharp, white-hot spike plunged behind my eye, the kind of blinding migraine that cancels all future plans and demands immediate darkness. I managed to murmur my apologies to the team, called my assistant, and knew instantly that the only place I could find silence deep enough to survive. The pain was my own bedroom. Mark was supposed to be in a long, crucial meeting across town. I was due back at 6. It was barely 1:45 p.m. I drove the 20 minutes home feeling like my skull was splitting, anticipating the relief of cool sheets and closed blinds. But as I turned into our familiar driveway in Scottsdale, the migraine was instantly forgotten, replaced by a cold, sharp jolt of adrenaline. Mark's black sedan was there. It was parked haphazardly, too, close to the garage door, sitting at a strange angle like someone had just slammed on the brakes and fled the vehicle. Why is he home? The thought should have been comforting. Perhaps he was also sick. But the sight of the misplaced car felt like an alarm bell screaming in the quiet afternoon. The front door was usually secured with 3 different locks. Today, it clicked open under my touch. Odd. Very odd. I stepped inside, and the heavy silence hit me first. The house was a large, modern space, always filled with some ambient sound. The air conditioning cycling, the water purifier humming, the faint noise of the pool filter. Now, it was dead quiet. A smothering, unnatural hush. And then came the scent. It wasn't the sophisticated blend of sandalwood and fig I usually wore, or Mark's crisp cologne. This was overwhelmingly sweet, cloying, cheap, and fiercely floral. It was the sickeningly persistent lily of the valley that Clara, our neighbor, doused herself in, the perfume that always gave me a slight headache even on pleasant days. The dread settled into my bones, heavy and cold. My breathing became shallow. I slipped off my heels in the entrance hall, not wanting the click of the leather to give away my ascent. Every step on the plush white carpet was deliberate, slow, agonizingly silent. The stairs felt impossibly long. I reached the landing, and the cloying scent intensified, leading me like a grotesque trail of breadcrumbs toward the master bedroom. Our door, the heavy mahogany barrier to our supposed sanctuary, was ajar. Just a sliver. I stopped. I didn't need to hear anything, didn't need to see anything. The air itself was thick with deceit. But I am a planner. I needed evidence, not conjecture. I gently placed my leather briefcase on the floor. I listened. Low, hurried, ragged whispering. Mark's voice, husky and unfamiliar, followed by a sharp, breathless laugh that I recognized as Clara's. They were not discussing investments or committee meetings. My hand didn't shake. My jaw didn't clench. There was no wave of heat or fury. Instead, there was a profound, chilling clarity. This was the moment. I pushed the door open, slowly, deliberately, allowing the light from the hallway to stream into the shaded room. The sight was precisely what I had anticipated, yet the realization still felt like a physical blow, a sudden vacuum of air in my lungs. There they were, Mark and Clara, tangled in the high thread count duvet I had splurged on during our anniversary trip to Italy. Mark's back was to the door, but I saw the panic in Clara's face first. Her eyes widened into saucers, instantly registering my presence, instantly reflecting her shame and terror. She scrambled, trying desperately to cover herself with a single, inadequate sheet. Mark spun around, his mouth opening, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated guilt. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds, but in that void, I was reborn. The human reaction, the scream, the cry, the physical attack, died inside me. The strategist took over. I reached into my shoulder bag, pulled out my phone, and with a hand steady enough to perform surgery, I switched the camera to video mode. I didn't utter a sound until the recording icon was blinking red. I panned slowly, capturing the discarded clothes in a heap, the specific patterned duvet, Clara's tear-filled, horrified expression, and Mark's desperate attempt to cover his lower body. "Mark," I said, my voice shockingly level, devoid of any inflection. "Look at the camera." He flinched as if struck. "Honey, wait. It's not what it looks like." The lie, so pathetic, so predictable, didn't even register as an insult. It was merely background noise for the evidence gathering. I zoomed slightly to capture a close-up of Clara's face, then panned, back to the state of the bed. "It is exactly what it looks like, Mark. It looks like adultery, misconduct, and the complete destruction of a 15-year marriage. But thank you for the confirmation." I recorded for 90 solid seconds, enough to confirm time, place, participants, and the state of undress. Then, I lowered the phone, satisfied. I took one slow step back, never taking my eyes off them. They were frozen, waiting for the explosion, the hysterical release they thought they deserved. They got silence. I backed out of the room, pulled the mahogany door firmly shut, and twisted the lock. Click. The sound resonated like the closing of a coffin lid. They were trapped. They could rage, they could beg, but they could not leave. Not yet. I walked downstairs, gliding through the heavy scent of betrayal, and went straight to the kitchen island. I poured a glass of water, added ice, and took a long, calming sip. Now, for the final piece of the trap. I scrolled through my contacts, ignoring Mark's frantic pounding on the door upstairs, and found Michael's number. Michael, Clara's kind, quiet, unsuspecting husband. He deserved to see this spectacle too. I pressed call, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register the moment he answered. "Michael, it's me, Sarah. I need you to come to my house immediately. I have a situation involving Clara and Mark, and you need to witness it. Do not, under any circumstances, call Clara or mention this to anyone. Just drive. Now." He stammered, confused, but the authority in my tone cut through his bewilderment. He agreed to be here in 15 minutes. The game had truly begun. They thought they were merely caught. They were about to understand they were sealed in a box, awaiting judgment. The metallic tang of betrayal was already coating my tongue, even before I stepped inside the silence of my own home. I was supposed to be in a tedious, 6-hour budget review downtown, but a migraine, the kind that feels like someone hammering spikes behind your eyes, had forced me into an early, unplanned retreat. I needed the prescription-strength medication I kept locked in the safe upstairs, and I needed darkness, immediately. That was the logical, undeniable reason for my premature return to our pristine house in the suburbs of San Diego, a reason Mark couldn't possibly dispute. The first anomaly wasn't auditory. but visual. Mark's black sedan was parked snugly in the garage. He had explicitly told me he was at an all-day client meeting across the county line. The air conditioning was humming at full blast, yet the house felt impossibly still, suspended in an unnatural quiet that screamed of secrecy. I slipped out of my heels by the mudroom, moving on the cool marble floor with the stealth of a predator. And then, the scent. It wasn't the rich, woody cologne Mark favored, nor the subtle hint of my own jasmine body cream. It was heavy, sickly sweet, and aggressively floral. A cheap, unforgettable cloud of synthetic fragrance that clung to everything. It was Clara's signature perfume. I had smelled it 1,000 times during neighborhood barbecues, dismissing it as simply too much. Now, in the confines of my own sanctuary, it was the smell of impending ruin. My heart didn't pound. It simply locked up, cold and heavy in my chest. I didn't pause to analyze or breathe. Analysis was for later. This was instinct. I gripped the railing, ascending the stairs slowly, deliberately, forcing my feet to make no sound on the thick carpet. With every upward movement, the scent grew stronger, a toxic plume leading me directly to the master bedroom. The door was not closed tightly. It was pushed slightly ajar, maybe an inch or two, a sliver of darkness promising the worst possible truth. I reached the landing, paused outside that threshold that had defined 15 years of my adult life, and I pushed the door open just enough to see. It wasn't a shock that made me gasp or cry out. It was a cold, precise obliteration of reality. Mark was there. Clara was there. They were entangled in the sheets I had chosen, the afternoon sun highlighting the betrayal on our king-sized bed. He was laughing softly, a sound I had once cherished, now twisted into something obscene. Clara was facing me, her eyes closed, her hair spread carelessly across my silk pillows. They weren't hiding. They were utterly absorbed, comfortable, arrogant in their mutual filth. It was the casual intimacy, the sheer domesticity of their coupling in my space, that sliced through my composure. For 1 second, time evaporated. My mind offered me the choice: collapse, scream, rage, or calculate. I chose calculation. I didn't make a sound. The scream that clawed its way up my throat was swallowed whole, turning my silence into a weapon far sharper than any shout. My hand, steady as stone, slipped into my structured leather handbag. I retrieved my phone, unlocked it, and without hesitation, pressed the record button. I held the phone up, positioning the lens to capture the entire scene. The distinctive art print above the headboard, the specific lighting, the undeniable faces of my husband and my neighbor, locked in their sordid embrace. I zoomed in just enough to confirm their identities, whispering, only into the microphone, a sound they were too preoccupied to notice, but one that would confirm the time and the location irrevocably. I needed this documentation to be perfect, legally sound, and utterly devastating. They had offered me indisputable evidence, and I was not going to waste it by becoming hysterical. When the recording reached the 2-minute mark, I slowly lowered the phone, backing away from the sliver of the doorway. I eased the door shut with excruciating gentleness, ensuring the latch clicked softly, trapping them inside their moment of indiscretion. They thought they were enjoying a quick afternoon delight. They were actually waiting for their judgment. Michael, Clara's unsuspecting husband, was still speeding toward the house. I had told him it was an emergency, and I had been terrifyingly honest about that. The emergency was the sudden, catastrophic failure of 2 marriages, and he was about to be a key witness. I rushed, silently to the master bathroom, not to look in the mirror, but to retrieve something crucial. Under the sink, hidden behind the cleaning supplies, was the small, extra key to the deadbolt lock on the bedroom door. The one we used only when traveling, or when we wanted a deep, undisturbed sleep. I retrieved it. my fingers trembling slightly for the first time. With the key secure in my palm, I moved back to the bedroom door. I inserted the key into the deadbolt, turned it firmly, and pulled the key out. They were still inside, oblivious, now physically locked into the scene of their crime. I checked the time. Michael should be pulling into the driveway any second. I had secured the location and the primary visual evidence. Now, I needed the secondary, digital ammunition. I sprinted down to Mark's home office, my mind racing ahead of my feet. They thought they were merely caught. They were about to understand they were sealed in a box, awaiting not just exposure, but complete professional and social annihilation. The game had truly begun, and I intended to win the first round before they even realized they were playing. The headache was a dull, persistent hammer against my temples, the kind that demands absolute darkness and silence. I was supposed to be across town finalizing the paperwork for the new gallery space in New York, but halfway there, the pain became debilitating. I pulled over, texted my partner that I was canceling the meeting, and decided the only sensible thing was to return to our sanctuary in Greenwich. I didn't text Mark. He had his usual client schedule, booked solid until late afternoon. I just wanted my bed. The drive felt long, heavy with the oppressive heat of the late spring afternoon. As the automatic gate swung open, granting me passage into what I still considered our shared private world, a small irrational knot tightened in my stomach. I pulled into the garage, and there it was. His sleek, aggressive black sedan, parked perfectly in his usual spot. Mark was supposed to be miles away. My heels felt too loud on the marble floor of the foyer. I kicked them off, the silence of the house instantly swallowing the sound. It wasn't the welcoming silence of an empty home. It was the tense, charged quiet of a stage waiting for the curtain to rise. I called out softly, "Mark, are you home?" Nothing. Just the faint hum of the air, conditioning struggling against the outside temperature. I started toward the kitchen, thinking perhaps he was making coffee, but stopped dead at the foot of the stairs. It hit me first, a wave of scent that was utterly foreign and instantly recognizable as wrong. It wasn't the expensive, woody fragrance Mark wore, nor was it my own subtle jasmine. This was cloying, sickly sweet, a heavy floral mixed with cheap musk. It was the scent that clung to Sarah, our neighbor. Sarah, the woman who borrowed my baking pans and whose children played with my nephews. The stairs creaked slightly beneath my bare feet as I ascended, each step a countdown to detonation. The pounding in my head had vanished, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. I was acutely aware of the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams filtering through the hall window, the exact position of a forgotten book on a side table. Every mundane detail was magnified by the dread building in my chest. The master bedroom door was not closed. It was ajar, a sliver of darkness showing. I paused, taking a breath so shallow it barely moved my lungs. The adrenaline coursed through me, paralyzing the emotion, leaving only raw, observational function. I didn't push the door. I nudged it with the tip of my finger. The world dissolved into that single, horrific frame. He was there, messy, flushed, and utterly exposed. And she was with him. Sarah, the image of suburban helpfulness, stripped down to something pathetic and transactional. The tableau was disgusting, not because of the act itself, but because of the sheer violation of trust, the lazy, audacious disrespect of doing it in our bed, under the roof we had built together. There was no sound from me, no gasp, no scream, no dramatic hand over the mouth. My body responded with the efficiency of a trained operative. The shock was immediate, a physical blow to the solar plexus, yet it was immediately encased in ice. I reached into my shoulder bag, my fingers finding the familiar cold glass of my phone. I switched to video, ensuring the timestamp and location data would be secured. I didn't rush. I filmed them from 2 separate angles, capturing the faces, the proximity, the undeniable evidence of their deceit. They were too engrossed, too reckless, too stupid to notice the slow, deliberate turning of my phone's camera lens. When the footage was secured, I backed away silently, the door still slightly open. They deserved a moment to realize what they had lost before they knew they had been caught. I moved to the exterior of the bedroom door, retrieved the spare key, and with a definitive click, locked them inside. The sound finally pierced their bubble. A gasp, a frantic whisper, the rustle of movement. I could hear Mark's panicked voice, muffled and desperate, pounding on the door from the inside. They were trapped, prisoners of their own reckless passion, confined in the monument of my ruined life. I didn't stay to listen to the panic. I descended the stairs, my purpose now crystallized. This was not a moment for tears. It was a moment for legal strategy. They thought they were merely dealing with an angry wife. They were about to meet a meticulous, betrayed business owner. The first step was the alliance. David, Sarah's husband. He was a quiet, decent man. A man who, like me, believed in the sanctity of the vows they had taken. I found his number in my contacts, noting the irony that he was listed under emergency contact for Sarah's kids. My voice, when I spoke, was steady, low, and terrifyingly calm. "David," I said, not even bothering with a greeting. "I need you to come to my house immediately. Do not call Sarah. Do not text Mark. Just drive here and come in through the back door. I have information regarding both of them that cannot wait." I hung up, before he could process the shock in my tone. The preliminary visual evidence was secure, and the co-conspirator was en route. Now, I needed the digital ammunition. I sprinted toward Mark's home office, my mind racing ahead of my feet. They thought they were merely caught. They were about to understand they were sealed in a box, awaiting not just exposure, but complete professional and social annihilation. The game had truly begun, and I intended to win the first round before they even realized they were playing. It was a blinding white flash of pain, starting behind my left eye and radiating down my neck. I remember pulling my car over on I-95, the harsh midday sun turning the road into a shimmering torture chamber. There was no way I could make it through the board meeting. I called my assistant, canceling the afternoon, and instead of driving straight to the pharmacy, the only thought solid enough to hold on to was the dark silence of our bedroom. I just needed my prescription-strength medication and the blackout curtains. That was the logical, mundane reason I came home 4 hours early, inadvertently signing the death certificate of my entire marriage. I pulled into the driveway, frowning instantly. Mark's Lexus was parked slightly crookedly, angled too far to the left. He was supposed to be across town presenting to clients. A spike of anxiety, not from the migraine, shot through me. I tried to rationalize it away. Maybe he forgot his wallet, or maybe he also felt sick. The house looked utterly normal from the outside, the perfect 2-story colonial in the perfect suburb of Dallas, Texas. The key turned silently in the lock. The air conditioning was on, but the house was unnaturally quiet. Too quiet for 2 people supposedly working from home. I kicked off my heels by the door, pressing my fingers against my temples. The silence felt heavy, suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath. And then I smelled it. It wasn't Mark's familiar, expensive cologne. This was a scent I knew intimately, one I had bought for my neighbor Jessica on her last birthday. A heady blend of vanilla and sandalwood she loved, rich and unmistakable. It hung in the air of the foyer like a chemical cloud, a misplaced declaration. My stomach dropped, the migraine instantly forgotten, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. I didn't need to see anything. I already knew. My intuition, the quiet voice I had dismissed for months whenever Mark seemed distracted, was now screaming its triumph in a terrible silent chorus. I moved slowly, deliberately, toward the master suite upstairs. The Persian runner silenced my steps. Each stair creaked a silent protest under my weight, a rhythm of doom. As I approached the closed bedroom door, I noticed the glint of Mark's watch on the bedside table through the slightly ajar bathroom door. He always took it, off before showering, but it was only 2 p.m. My hand paused on the cool brass handle. This was the point of no return. I took a deep, shaky breath, the vanilla scent growing stronger, sickly sweet. The image of the perfect life, the weekend trips, the shared mortgage, the years of trust, shattered into a million sharp fragments, and I felt nothing but a terrifying emptiness where my heart used to be. I pushed the door open, not dramatically, but with a slow grinding inevitability. They were there. My husband Mark, and my friend Jessica. The shock wasn't the sight itself, which was devastatingly, sickeningly clear, but the utter banality of the betrayal. They weren't hiding in some seedy hotel. They were in our bed, under the duvet I had just had dry cleaned. Jessica looked up first, her face freezing in a grotesque mask of panic, her eyes wide and wet. Mark, slower to react, turned his head, his handsome face dissolving into a mixture of fear and shame. A sound tried to claw its way out of my throat, but I swallowed it down. I would not give them the satisfaction of a hysterical scene. I would not crumble. The survival instinct was immediate and absolute. My hand went straight to my handbag, pulling out my phone. I didn't rush. I held the device steady, switching the camera to video mode, making sure the timestamp and the room's ambient sound were captured perfectly. I filmed the entire scene, the messy sheets, the discarded clothes, their paralyzed faces, a cold, objective record of the moment my life fractured. Mark started to stammer. "Honey, wait, it's not what it looks like." I didn't answer. I didn't even look him in the eye. I completed the recording, turned, and stepped back out, pulling the heavy, solid oak door shut with a decisive click. I didn't lock it yet. I wanted them to stew in the knowledge that I had seen them, completely and utterly exposed. I retreated to the hallway, my back pressed against the cool plaster wall, phone still clutched tightly. My mind, now purely analytical, skipped ahead. Mark and Jessica were trapped upstairs, panicking, debating their lie. I had the visual evidence. Now it was time to bring in the third act. I scrolled through my contacts until I found David's name. David, Jessica's husband, Mark's business partner, the man who had officiated our wedding. I took another deep breath, forcing my voice to be low, steady, and entirely devoid of emotion. I knew this call would destroy his world just as mine had been destroyed 5 minutes earlier. But David was not my enemy. He was my key witness, my strategic ally. He answered on the second ring, his tone jovial, probably expecting Mark. "Sarah? Everything okay? You sound—" "David," I interrupted, cutting straight through the pleasantries. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not interrupt. Do not scream. Just listen." My voice held the sharpness of shattered glass. "I am home right now. Mark and Jessica are together in my bedroom. I have proof. I need you to come to the house immediately. Do not call Jessica. Do not call Mark. Just drive here now. And David?" I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, sealing the gravity of the request. "Bring your lawyer." The game wasn't just starting. The first tactical move had already been executed. They were still upstairs, scrambling for excuses. I was downstairs, building the legal case for their absolute annihilation. The migraine was gone. All I felt was the exhilarating, cold clarity of absolute control. I had secured the visual evidence and recruited my crucial ally. Now, the digital warfare had to begin. The day had started normally, a cascade of meetings and conference calls. But by 2 o'clock, the headache was a jackhammer behind my eyes. I was supposed to be in a long-winded meeting downtown, finalizing the paperwork for the new gallery space we were investing in near New Haven. I'd rushed out that morning, confident that James had double-checked the closing documents. But halfway through the drive, a sharp, cold dread hit me. The original signed escrow agreement was still on my desk at home. Missing it would halt the entire deal. I tried to call James, but he didn't pick up. Typical. He was always in a focus zone during the workday, even though he knew the importance of this transfer. I had no choice but to turn the car around and retreat to our quiet street in Greenwich. Driving back felt wrong. The sun was too bright, the neighborhood too silent. I pulled into the driveway, frowning. James's black sedan was parked neatly in the garage. His office schedule was packed. He should have been miles away in Stamford. Maybe he had a severe case of food poisoning. I felt a brief flicker of concern, quickly overridden by irritation. If he was sick, why hadn't he messaged me? I used my key, twisting the deadbolt. The house was unnervingly silent. Not the usual domestic quiet, but the kind of silence that swallows sound, heavy and smothering. I kicked off my heels by the door. That's when I smelled it. A cloying, heavy floral scent. It wasn't my light, familiar tuberose, nor the subtle sandalwood James preferred. This was gardenia and cheap desperation, aggressive and saccharine. My hand instinctively went to my chest. Calm down, Amelia. Maybe he hired a cleaner today. But cleaners didn't drive James's luxury sedan. I moved through the foyer, past the living room, toward the home office where the documents lay. But I couldn't ignore the silence or that scent, which was stronger near the main staircase. Each step I took was a betrayal of the life I thought I was living. I remember the feel of the carpet beneath my stocking feet, thick and plush, muffling any sound I might make. The door to our master suite was slightly ajar. I stopped breathing. I heard a low, unfamiliar laugh, muffled, followed by a grunt that was undeniably James, my perfect, solid, trustworthy James. It wasn't a casual sound. It was the sound of vulgar, consuming intimacy. The world tipped on its axis. I pushed the door open, slowly, deliberately. The sight was immediate, grotesque, and definitive. He was there, tangled in the white duvet I had bought last week, eyes closed, sweat glistening on his forehead. And beside him, her. Eleanor. Eleanor, my neighbor. The woman whose children I had watched during their school holidays. The woman who borrowed my sugar and shared deep secrets about motherhood over wine. The sheer devastating banality of the betrayal was what struck me first. The casualness, the lack of hiding, the absolute disregard for every shared memory and every promise. They looked up simultaneously, their faces morphing from flushed pleasure to instant, wide-eyed terror. My first instinct was not to scream. It was not to cry or throw things, though my stomach was trying to claw its way out of my throat. My first instinct, thanks to years of high-stakes corporate negotiation, was cold, analytical documentation. I didn't say a word. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and turned on the camera. The red recording light blinked. I held the phone steady, moving it slowly across the room, capturing the scene, their naked, panicked forms, the discarded clothes, the intimate mess that was the ruin of my marriage. "Get dressed," I finally said, my voice thin, high, and utterly devoid of emotion. It sounded like cracked ice. "Do not move anything. Do not touch that phone." James scrambled for the sheet, his skin turning a sickly gray. Eleanor, bless her suburban soul, looked like she was about to vomit, her hands fluttering uselessly over her exposed body. "Amelia, please," James whispered, crawling back toward the headboard, his voice thick with shame, the first attempt at minimization already forming on his lips. I didn't acknowledge him. I finished recording, made sure the video was safely backed up to the cloud, and then walked calmly to the massive walk-in closet. I pulled out a spare set of keys, the ones I kept hidden inside a decoy jewelry box, and walked back to the door. I locked it from the outside. "You have precisely 10 minutes to get dressed and sit on the edge of the bed," I instructed, my eyes meeting James's, devoid of the love I had carried for him for 15 years. "If you try to leave, I will call the police and file a restraining order right now. Understand?" They didn't respond, only stared, paralyzed. The exhilarating, terrifying clarity was setting in. They were trapped, humiliated, and utterly under my control. I walked downstairs, past the floral scent now permanently tainted by betrayal, and settled in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of cold water. My hands didn't shake. They were steady as I navigated my contacts list. David, Eleanor's husband, was a kind, gentle man who ran a small construction firm, oblivious and devoted. This was going to destroy him, but he deserved to know before James and Eleanor manufactured their pathetic version of events. I dialed David's number. It rang twice before he answered, his voice booming and cheerful. "Amelia, hey, everything okay? Eleanor said you were feeling a bit under the weather." The irony was a razor blade on my tongue. "David," I said, my voice low and controlled, hiding the volcano churning inside me. "I need you to listen very carefully, and please, do not interrupt me until I finish." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, sealing the gravity of the request. "Bring your lawyer. Meet me at my house in the next hour. James and Eleanor are upstairs in my bedroom right now. I have video proof." The game wasn't just starting. The first tactical move had already been executed. They were still upstairs, scrambling for excuses. I was downstairs, building the legal case for their absolute annihilation. The migraine was gone. All I felt was the exhilarating cold clarity of absolute control. I had secured the visual evidence and recruited my crucial ally. Now, the digital warfare had to begin. It was the worst headache I'd had all year, a throbbing siren, behind my eyes that made the fluorescent lights of the office feel like shards of glass. I told Brenda I was clocking out. I simply couldn't stare at another spreadsheet, couldn't endure the endless drone of the air conditioning. Returning home at 2:30 in the afternoon was completely off schedule, but fate, it seemed, had a very specific itinerary for me that Tuesday. I just wanted darkness, silence, and the heavy comforter of our master bed. The drive from downtown, Dallas, was a blur of shimmering heat and throbbing temples. When I pulled into our quiet suburban street, the first thing I noticed was James's black SUV. It was parked perfectly in the center of the garage, right where it should have been if he had been home all day. Odd. He was supposed to be at the downtown branch until 5, finishing the quarterly reports that he claimed were stressing him so much. I pulled the key from the ignition, and the sudden quiet of the house hit me immediately. Too quiet. My ears strained, listening past the pulsing in my temples. Was the television on? The radio? No. Just a profound, unsettling stillness that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. Then, the smell. It wasn't the familiar, comforting scent of my own home, not the lingering trace of last night's dinner, or the citrus scent of my cleaning supplies. It was heady, cloying, utterly familiar. Eleanor's signature gardenia perfume. Eleanor, the woman who lived 2 houses down. The woman who borrowed my sugar and watched my dog when we traveled. The perfume was thick in the air, hanging around the mudroom like a visible cloud. My stomach instantly turned, and the headache momentarily receded, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. My legs moved automatically, one careful step after the other, soundless on the plush carpet runner leading upstairs. Each beat of my heart was a dull, terrifying drum against the silence. The light was on, in our master bedroom, spilling a careless rectangle onto the hallway floor. As I reached the top landing, I saw the slightly ajar door. I didn't push it open right away. I froze, inhaling that sickeningly sweet gardenia scent again, letting the undeniable reality settle into my bones before I let my eyes confirm the disaster. I finally pushed the door just enough to see. The room was bathed in the pale afternoon light filtering through the sheer curtains. There he was, my husband James, framed against the window, and there she was, Eleanor, my trusted neighbor. They looked grotesque, not passionate. Their hurried movements were clumsy, desperate, and deeply humiliating. It wasn't a scene of love. It was a cheap, rushed transaction of bodies, utterly devoid of any tenderness. The true shock wasn't the physical sight. That was just a biological reaction. The shock was the sudden, violent shattering of everything I thought was true about my life, my marriage, and my friendships. The scream caught in my throat, not out of pain, but out of sheer, overwhelming disbelief. And then, the disbelief vanished, replaced by an icy, metallic focus. I did not drop my bag. I did not rush forward to claw her eyes out or scream at him for destroying 20 years of history. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and stabilized my hand. The flash was off. The camera was recording. I held the phone steady, capturing the indisputable, date-stamped, geotagged evidence of their betrayal, their faces contorted in confusion and shame as they finally registered my presence, standing silent and stone-cold in the doorway. Their panic was instantaneous, a desperate flailing for clothes and dignity, James shouting my name, Eleanor trying to hide her face with a discarded pillow. I didn't say a word. I held the phone until I had enough high-resolution footage. Every angle, every sound of his pathetic denial beginning to form. Then, I backed away slowly, deliberately. I walked out of the bedroom, closed the heavy mahogany door, and listened to James rattling the handle and pleading from inside. I wasn't done securing the crime scene. I grabbed the spare key from the hall table, the one we kept for emergency cleaning access, slipped it into the lock, and turned it sharply. Click. They were locked in, trapped with their mess and their sudden paralyzing fear. I walked, downstairs, not running, maintaining the same unnatural calm that had settled over me. My hands were shaking now, a delayed tremor of adrenaline, but my mind was laser-focused. I needed to breathe, but I couldn't waste time. I sat down at the kitchen island, pulling Robert's number from my contacts. Robert, Eleanor's perfectly nice, unsuspecting husband, who was probably sitting in his cubicle right now, eating a sad desk lunch. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful, professional. I skipped the pleasantries. My voice was steady, impossibly calm. Robert, this is Amelia. I am so sorry to do this to you, but there is something you need to see. I came home early, and James and Eleanor are upstairs in my bedroom right now. I have video proof. Please, come here immediately. I need you to use the next hour wisely. I hung up before he could respond, cutting through the strangled sound he made. The game wasn't just starting. The first tactical move had already been executed. They were still upstairs, scrambling for excuses. I was downstairs, building the legal case for their absolute annihilation. The migraine was gone. All I felt was the exhilarating, cold clarity of absolute control. I had secured the visual evidence and recruited my crucial ally. Now, the digital warfare had to begin. I pressed end call with David, cutting through the strangled sound he made. The tactical move had been executed, but the sheer brutal weight of the last 20 minutes, the minutes leading up to that call, rushed back, threatening to collapse the cold fortress I had built around my heart. I hadn't come home early out of suspicion. That was the sickening irony. I had been rushing, stressed, trying to salvage a disastrous morning at the office. The critical signed merger documents for Sterling Corp. were sitting on the kitchen island. A huge mistake I'd only realized during my commute. A simple, irritating mistake that cracked open the foundation of my entire life in one decisive moment. Pulling my Mercedes into the garage, I noted immediately that Michael's car was already parked crookedly in his spot. Odd. He was supposed to be in a meeting downtown until late afternoon. I shrugged it off as a schedule change, gathering my briefcase and keys. The front door wasn't locked. It was slightly ajar, which was the second anomaly. Michael was meticulous about security. A heavy silence pressed down on the house, unnatural for midday. It wasn't the quiet of an empty home. It was the suffocating stillness of people holding their breath. Every nerve ending suddenly began to hum, not with rage, but with a deep, primal fear of the unknown. I didn't call out. I didn't want to break the silence. I walked through the mudroom, dropping my briefcase soundlessly, acutely aware of the rich, cloying scent that permeated the air. It wasn't my expensive, sophisticated perfume. It was cheap, heavy, aggressively floral, gardenia mixed with Michael's familiar cedar aftershave. It was Sarah's scent. Sarah, our neighbor, the woman whose kids I babysat last week. My feet moved automatically toward the stairs, each step a distinct booming echo in the unnatural hush. I felt dizzy, not from the sudden realization, but from the altitude of impending catastrophe. Please, God, let this be a simple misunderstanding. Maybe she stopped by to borrow something, and they're just talking. I knew it was a lie, but the rational mind fights to the death before accepting the unspeakable. I reached the top landing. The door to our master bedroom, the room we had chosen paint colors for, the room where we dreamt of the future, was slightly ajar, just like the front door. I stopped, planting my feet firmly on the plush carpet. I didn't push the door open fully. I just leaned my shoulder against the frame and widened the gap just enough to see inside. The world dissolved into fragments of vivid, devastating color. There was Michael, his face flushed and contorted, his wedding band glinting obscenely under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. And there was Sarah, her distinct, unprofessional blonde hair spread across my silk pillows, her laughter a muffled, gasping sound that tore through the air. The details were immediate, brutal, and utterly final. The sight wasn't just physical. It was the wreckage of 7 years of trust, loyalty, and partnership strewn across our king-sized bed. The shock was a physical blow, paralyzing my throat before a scream could escape. But that paralysis only lasted a fraction of a second. Something cold, precise, and entirely alien took over. The sophisticated woman who had planned the Sterling merger stepped forward, displacing the heartbroken wife. I reached slowly into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. My hand did not shake. My breathing remained steady. I unlocked the screen, navigated to the camera app, and switched to video. I held the phone up, not directly in front of the door where they might see me immediately, but angled perfectly to capture the scene, the faces, the undeniable truth. I zoomed in just enough to confirm the tattoo on Sarah's shoulder, the tiny butterfly I had always found tacky, and the expensive watch Michael swore was an investment. I didn't need audio yet. I needed visual proof of the act and the location. I recorded for 30 seconds, making sure the date and timestamp were irrefutable parts of the metadata. They were too absorbed in their disgusting little bubble to notice the sliver of light from my phone screen reflecting on the opposite wall. I pressed stop. Then, with the practiced silence of a seasoned predator, I backed away from the door, descending the stairs as silently as I had climbed them. The gardenia scent, now, smelled like rot. I reached the bottom, walked directly to the locked filing cabinet in the study, and retrieved the spare key to the master suite. a key I had forgotten existed until that very moment. I returned to the landing, swift and silent as a phantom. They were still murmuring upstairs. The click of the lock was barely audible, drowned out by their self-absorbed sounds of betrayal. I didn't just lock the door. I turned the deadbolt, sealing them inside that filthy room. They were trapped. The evidence was secured. The cold realization that this was not just a mistake, but a calculated, ongoing deceit fueled a clarity I'd never known. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about justice and asset protection. I retreated to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice water, and pulled up Sarah's contact card. No, not Sarah. I needed the real player in this game. I found David's number, Sarah's unsuspecting husband, a man Michael considered a friend, a man I genuinely liked. I took a deep breath, the cold water stinging my throat. This was the moment I stopped being the victim and started being the architect of their downfall. David deserved to know, but more importantly, David was an executive at a major law firm. He was my first necessary chess piece. The call was brief, brutal, and effective. "David," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic destruction happening 20 feet away. "You need to come home immediately. Bring your lawyer. I have something you need to see. And trust me, you'll want to handle the next hour wisely." I had secured the visual evidence and recruited my crucial ally. Now, the digital warfare had to begin, confirming what I already knew. This was not a one-time slip-up. They were still upstairs, scrambling for excuses or perhaps just savoring the last moments of their clandestine routine. I was downstairs, building the legal case for their absolute annihilation. The migraine that usually accompanied high stress was gone. All I felt was the exhilarating cold clarity of absolute control. I remember the moment the cold clarity settled, not in the aftermath, but the very instant I walked through the front door. It wasn't the plan to be home at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. I had an essential presentation scheduled for the afternoon, the culmination of 3 months of grueling work. But halfway to the city center, I realized I'd left my professional tablet, the one containing all the proprietary client data, on the kitchen counter. A quick U-turn seemed annoying, a minor professional hiccup, but necessary. Pulling my car into the driveway of our perfectly manicured suburban home in Seattle, I noticed John's sedan. Odd. He usually only works from home on Fridays, using his downtown office for meetings during the week. I parked quickly and hurried inside, already mentally rehearsing the opening lines of my presentation, expecting to find him hunched over his laptop in the den, maybe taking an early coffee break. The silence hit me first. A heavy, unnatural stillness that swallowed the usual daytime sounds of the neighborhood. The distant whine of a leaf blower, the chirping of sparrows. The blinds were drawn in the living room, bathing the entryway in a murky, golden gloom. As I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl, I smelled it. Not John's familiar, spicy cologne, but a distinct heavy gardenia scent that belonged solely to Clara. Clara, our neighbor, the woman I shared recipes and vulnerabilities with, my supposed confidant. A knot tightened beneath my ribs, cold and instantaneous. Denial. It's the first defense mechanism the mind deploys. Maybe she just dropped off a book. Maybe she borrowed a cup of sugar. But why the drawn blinds? Why the absolute silence? Why the sudden, overwhelming pressure in my chest? My steps became slow, deliberate. The sound of my work heels clicking on the hardwood echoing like miniature gunshots in the empty space. I walked past the den. Empty. The kitchen. The tablet was still there. But a half-empty bottle of expensive wine, a vintage John reserved only for special occasions, sat open on the counter, next to 2 glasses, still wet with condensation. It was then I knew. The cold certainty bypassed the stage of fear or confusion entirely. I didn't run. I didn't hold my breath. I simply started walking toward the staircase, each step a measured climb toward the inevitable collapse of my meticulously built universe. The gardenia scent grew overpowering as I neared the landing, mingling cloyingly with the faint aroma of John's laundry detergent. When I reached the top, the master bedroom door was not closed, merely ajar, resting maybe 2 inches open. I could hear movement, a low rhythmic creaking that wasn't the old house settling, and a faint sound, almost like a sigh being stifled. My hand trembled, but not from fear. From a terrible, surging adrenaline that demanded action, not emotion. I didn't knock. I didn't call out his name. I pushed the door inward slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to register the image before it could fully destroy me. And there they were. My husband, John, whose eyes had promised forever under the California sunshine years ago, entangled with Clara, whose kids often played in my backyard sandbox. They were caught mid-act, a twisted tableau of betrayal framed by the expensive wallpaper I had chosen. The scene was sickeningly ordinary, which was perhaps the most horrifying part. Messy sheets, the midday sunlight trying to penetrate the silk curtains, and the absolute, undeniable proof of their calculated deceit. For one agonizing second, they didn't see me. I watched them, registering the curve of his back, the way her hand rested on his, shoulder, familiar, possessive. It wasn't lust or anger that hit me. It was the sheer, brutal violation of trust, the deep cut of shared time made worthless. Then John's eyes flickered up, catching my reflection in the dark, polished wood of the bedside table. His face went instantly blank, then crimson, an expression of sheer horror and naked guilt washing over him. Clara followed his gaze, pulling the duvet instinctively to her chest, her mouth forming a silent, pathetic "oh" of recognition. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The woman who had planned their future dissolved, replaced by a ruthless prosecutor. My hand, steady as stone, raised my phone. I didn't care that they saw it. I pressed record. "Don't move," I stated, my voice low, perfectly level, devoid of any discernible emotion. It was a command, not a plea. I filmed for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 40 seconds, making sure the angle included both of them, the distinct features of the bedroom and the timestamp flashing in the corner of the screen. Proof. Irrefutable. When the recording stopped, I simply backed out of the room. I reached for the spare key that was always kept above the doorframe, a trick we had learned years ago, and with a sickening click I locked them inside. They began to shout, muffled protests against the thick oak door, but I ignored them. They could stay there and think about the price of their recklessness. I walked back down the stairs, retrieved my tablet, and immediately sat down at the kitchen island. The gardenia scent still clung to the air, but now it felt like residue, not a threat. The first person I contacted was Robert, Clara's husband. He deserved the same clarity I had just received, and I knew, in that moment of cold, calculated strategy, that the shock and rage he would feel would make him my greatest and most essential asset. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about ensuring that when the dust settled, I retained every shred of my dignity and security. My hand hovered over his number, anticipating the seismic shift that was about to rock his world. I took a deep, steady breath, the exhilarating cold clarity washing over me entirely. Click. The line started to ring. I had secured the visual evidence and recruited my crucial ally. Now, the digital warfare had to begin, confirming what I already knew. This was not a one-time slip-up. They were still upstairs, scrambling for excuses, or perhaps just savoring the last moments of their clandestine routine. I was downstairs, building the legal case for their absolute annihilation. The migraine that usually accompanied high stress was gone. All I felt was the exhilarating, cold clarity of absolute control. The signed partnership agreement was everything. I was already halfway down I-94 heading toward the Loop in downtown Chicago, mentally rehearsing the precise inflection points of my pitch, when the cold dread hit me. The physical copy, the one required for the final notarized signature, was still sitting squarely on the mahogany surface of my home office desk. It wasn't a document I could email. It wasn't an option to proceed without it. A 20-minute delay, tops. I signaled and swung the Mercedes back toward the quiet, manicured streets of Evanston, annoyed by the inefficiency, yet completely oblivious to the real, devastating reason the universe had forced my immediate return. I had assumed the house would be empty. David, my husband, the successful architect, should have been at his firm downtown hours ago. But pulling up the long, cobbled driveway, I saw it. David's black Audi SUV, the one he swore he needed for client optics, was parked lazily across the garage entrance. A ripple of confusion ran through me. My first thought was a canceled meeting. Maybe a sudden, convenient case of stomach flu. I keyed in the security code, the gentle electronic beep sounding deafening in the heavy silence of the hallway. The house felt wrong. The air was thick, not just with the stale scent of a closed-up house, but with something sickeningly synthetic. A cheap, overly sweet floral note that clashed violently and offensively with David's bespoke leather and sandalwood cologne. Sarah. That was Sarah's perfume. Sarah, our neighbor. The woman whose children I had watched just last week. The woman I had trusted implicitly to bring dessert to our dinner parties. A knot tightened in my stomach, cold and reptilian. My logical brain tried to scramble, offering benign excuses. Maybe she had dropped off a dish earlier and lingered. But the sight of David's parked car refuted every easy explanation. I just knew I needed that contract and I needed to get out before I had to face him and the inevitable, awkward small talk about his illness. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my expensive leather briefcase thudding against my hip. The thick carpet muffled my approach, an inadvertent blessing I would soon appreciate. When I reached the top landing, I could hear faint, rhythmic noises coming from our master bedroom, muffled sounds that were unmistakably carnal. My hand paused on the cold brass doorknob. There was no fire, no immediate rage, just a seismic, bone-deep realization that the foundation of my life, the decade of commitment, trust, and shared plans, was dissolving into dust behind that door. My heart didn't race. It stopped, suspended in a moment of terrible, absolute clarity. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open, hard enough for it to hit the wall with a hollow thump that echoed the demise of everything I thought was true. The scene was exactly what you imagine, yet infinitely worse because of who they were. David, the man who kissed me, goodbye this morning, tangled up in our king-sized bed with Sarah, the woman who confided in me about her marriage troubles. They froze instantly, caught mid-act, their faces a grotesque, horrified mask of shock and shame. The light from the large bay window illuminated the raw, ugly details of the betrayal. The silence that followed the door striking the wall was instantaneous, broken only by my own shallow, ragged breath. My brain did not scream. My carefully honed executive function took over. I did not drop my bag or cover my eyes. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, unlocked the camera app, and began recording. My hand was steady, unnervingly so. My voice emerged, distant and clinical, cutting through the heavy air. "Don't stop," I heard myself instruct them, the tone flat and devoid of any human warmth. "I need proof this wasn't an accident. I need to document this for the record." I took 3 steps into the room, captured the full scope of their misery and their identities clearly in the frame. Their shame was palpable, a heavy fog, but I registered nothing but tactical necessity. This was no longer a marriage. It was a legal case. I backed out of the room slowly, never breaking the recording, never looking away from their paralyzed, scrambling bodies. Once the door was closed, not slammed in a fury, but gently locked with the antique key I retrieved from the outside, I walked calmly downstairs to the kitchen island. David and Sarah were trapped, morally and physically. I ended the video, checking the timestamp. Perfect. My next call was mandatory, the first piece of the strategy secured. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed Mark, Sarah's unsuspecting husband. He answered on the third ring, sounding breezy and happy, the sound of a golf club hitting a ball whipping past the phone's receiver. He was definitely on the 10th hole, enjoying his Tuesday afternoon, oblivious. "Hey, Amanda. Wow, long time. How's it going?" he chirped. I took a deep breath, letting the cold fury crystallize into my delivery. "Mark," I said, my voice steady and professional, steel wrapped in silk. "I need you to stop playing golf immediately. I have a situation here in Evanston, and it involves David, Sarah, and irrefutable proof of a long-term affair. They are currently locked in my master bedroom. You need to come home now. Bring a good lawyer." I didn't wait for his choked denial or questions. I hung up the phone. The game was officially over, and I had just secured my crucial ally in the coming war. The exhilarating, cold clarity of absolute control flooded my veins. He had an old work tablet hidden under a stack of tax documents in the home office. David always assumed I wouldn't touch his professional things. He was wrong. While they were still drumming their fingers behind the locked bedroom door, I was scrolling through months of messages, and the evidence was far worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just physical. It was an entire alternate reality they had built while I slept beside him. They used code names for me, the landlord and the warden. I found transcripts where they meticulously planned trips, discussed refinancing our mortgage as seed money for their future life, and the absolute worst part, they mocked my devotion. She's so worried about us missing. Date night. She'd never suspect we're already together. Sarah had written just 3 weeks ago. It's like stealing candy from a very rich, very trusting baby. The sheer venomous cruelty extinguished the last flicker of pain, replacing it with a concrete, diamond-hard resolve. They hadn't just cheated. They had performed an elaborate, insulting play using my life as their stage. When Sarah's husband, Mark, arrived 30 minutes later with a corporate attorney who specialized in high-asset divorce, he moved fast. I had the tablet plugged into the large living room screen. The proofs were undeniable, time-stamped, and projected for all to see. I unlocked the bedroom door. They stumbled out, squinting in the light, dressed hastily and smelling of cheap panic. David tried to rush me, his face a mask of false offense. "Listen, honey, this is insane. We can explain. It was just a stupid mistake, a one-time." I raised my hand, cutting him off with the silence of a guillotine blade dropping. "Don't insult my intelligence, David. It was not a one-time mistake. It was a sustained, calculated campaign of betrayal and ridicule, documented right here." I gestured toward the screen. The lawyers, seated on the sofa, watched dispassionately. Sarah started to cry, the ugly, theatrical kind of weeping. "Please, David, tell her we were going to end it." I pressed the record button on my phone, pointed it at them, and spoke only to David. "Say that again for the court, David, that this was a stupid mistake, and that you were going to end it. Please, confirm for everyone that you were having a multi-month affair with our neighbor, Sarah, right here in our home." He swallowed, his eyes darting frantically between me, his supposed mistress, and the 2 expensive suits observing the spectacle. "Trapped," he muttered. "Yes, okay, we messed up. But we love each other, and we didn't want to hurt you." The recording was secured. That was all I needed. My lawyer, connected via speakerphone from New York, then took the lead. The conversation shifted instantly from emotional plea to legal reality. Mr. David, Mrs. Sarah, you are both required to leave the premises immediately. Due to the evidence of dissipation of marital assets and emotional distress caused by your documented actions, we are filing an emergency petition for divorce, coupled with a temporary restraining order ensuring Mrs. Bowenst my name, absolute possession of the Evanston property, effective immediately. Mr. Mark has the same rights regarding his property. David exploded. You can't do this. This is my house. Where are we supposed to go? That, David, I said, finally speaking, my voice dangerously calm, is entirely your problem. You should have thought of that before you decided to build your new life in the guest towels. You have exactly 30 minutes to collect essentials. If you touch any marital asset beyond clothing, you will face criminal charges for theft. The locksmith is due in 40 minutes. The next half hour was pure, sweet retribution. I watched them scramble, their connection instantly fraying under the pressure of reality. Sarah, distraught and mascara-streaked, blamed David for getting caught. David blamed Sarah for leaving her phone unlocked. They weren't a grand love story. They were two panicked thieves caught, red-handed. They walked out into the chilly Illinois evening, carrying garbage bags filled with their pathetic essentials. David paused on the threshold, turning to me with a strange mix of hate and fear. You'll regret this. You'll be alone. I looked past him, focusing on the fresh paint on the doorframe. I stopped being alone the moment I realized I didn't need you to define me. Goodbye, David. I heard the sound of the car starting, then silence. I walked into the hallway, breathed deep, and closed the door. Within the hour, the locksmith changed every lock, every code. I walked through the quiet house, now legally, emotionally, and physically mine. The cleansing had begun. 6 months later, the house felt new. I had gutted the master bedroom and turned it into a sleek, vibrant studio. I took the trip to Italy David always promised, but never delivered. My channel, this channel you're listening to right now, exploded. I started sharing stories of resilience and self-worth, recognizing that my biggest asset was not my marriage, but my voice. I was having lunch at a little cafe in downtown Chicago last week when I saw him. David. He was standing on the corner, waiting for the light to change. He looked tired, older, and slightly defeated, wearing a suit that was a little too tight. Sarah wasn't with him. He saw me, and for a split second, that old look of proprietary ownership flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by guilt and perhaps a residual hope that I might offer him a lifeline. He started to walk toward my table. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel rage or sadness or nostalgia. I felt absolutely nothing. It was like seeing a character from a book I read years ago. Interesting background. Zero relevance to my present plot. I smiled faintly, but not at him, at my own indifference. When he reached the edge of the patio, I simply picked up my phone and turned my attention completely to a message I was typing, making it clear he was invisible. He hesitated, realized I wouldn't acknowledge his existence, and walked away, shrinking into the bustling crowd. That, my friends, is how you know you are healed. When the ghost of the past no longer has the power to raise your pulse. If you are listening to this right now, and you feel that familiar knot of fear, that pull of obligation to a relationship that is clearly suffocating your spirit, hear this. Your worth is not tied to your partnership status. Your biggest act of love is the fierce protection of your own peace. Don't wait for permission to be happy, and never, ever minimize the gut feeling that tells you something is wrong. Trust yourself first, fight clean, and remember that closure is an inside job. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know many of you are listening from all over the world. Tell me in the comments. Where are you hearing this story? Right now? Drop your city and the time. And hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter on reclaiming your power. Until then, stay strong and live loud.